Well, Chris Philp, the Conservative MP for Croydon, is in our Westminster studio, and from what we're hearing here and from what we've seen, particularly in that interview there with Andrea Leadsom, a lot of anger from people on the streets here. Are you happy with the way the Conservative government has dealt with this?
Well, look, I think it was right for Theresa May yesterday to go and meet with the emergency services to make sure, crucially, the day after this happened, that they had all the help and support they needed. I see that she's gone to a hospital in the local area just an hour or two ago to meet with the victims. That was clearly the right thing to do. But what is really important now, as we heard on the clip a second ago, is that there is an urgent investigation, a public inquiry led by a High Court judge. But more urgently than that, we need, I think there is a review of every tall building in the country to make sure any safety issues are identified immediately. What happened 2 days ago there should never have happened. Clearly a 24-storey building shouldn't be engulfed in flames in the way that was. And we need to make sure we find out what the problem was. Was it the cladding? Was it the lack of sprinklers? Or was it something else? And whatever it was that let that terrible event happen must never, ever be allowed to happen again in this country.
Do you think that Prime Minister Theresa May was wrong not to meet with any of the people affected by this fire yesterday? Much criticism from them. They felt that she parachuted in, spent some 15 minutes and then left not having spoken to a single person in the area.
Well, look, I think her priority was obviously making sure the emergency services, who are still in the middle and still are in the middle of doing a very difficult job, have the support they need. And I think just, a matter of hours after this tragedy happened, having the Prime Minister descend with a media scrum possibly isn't what people need when they're dealing with very recent and very raw grief, or are still searching for missing loved ones. Sorry to interrupt you,
but that's what they said they wanted. They wanted to have a Prime Minister that empathised with them, that actually spoke to them, a Prime Minister that was within reach, not someone that was at a distance, and not a lead figure that they could look to.
Yeah, and look, I think that's why she's come back this morning and gone to the hospital to directly visit the people who are still recovering from their injuries. So I think that's what she's done today.
The investigation, as we know, the Prime Minister says that there'll be a full public inquiry. What should be paramount? What should be at the top of their list of items that they need to really address today?
Well, I think the most important thing is to work out what it is that went terribly wrong in this building, because this should clearly never have happened. So the top priority, which I think needs to happen in a matter of weeks, not a year or two, we need to work out what it was that went wrong, and if the same fault exists in any other building or any number of buildings in this country, that fault needs to be rectified in every single building as a matter of urgency. Clearly, there may be wider lessons to learn about how frequently, we look at fire safety. So that's a longer-term project for the public inquiry. Priority number one is making sure, in a matter of weeks or days, that this never happens again anywhere.
In your constituency of Croydon, do you know how many high-rise blocks there are of this ilk?
Well, across the country, there are 4,000 high-rise blocks that were built before it became mandatory to have sprinkler systems. So in 2007, it became mandatory for every new building above 30 metres, which is about 8 or 10 stories, had to have sprinkler systems. There are 4,000 that don't. In my constituency, Croydon South, off the top of my head, I can think of about 7 or 8 blocks which are over that height, and I understand that Croydon Council, our local council, in common with many other councils, are urgently performing checks on those buildings to see if there's any immediate risk.
Do you know how many blocks in your constituency have sprinklers today?
No, I don't, but they were mostly, I think all of them I'm thinking of, were built before 2007, so there's a very significant chance that they don't have sprinklers. Now, after the Lacanal fire in 2009, the coroner in 2013, when he wrote his report, said that the government should write to social housing providers, so local councils and registered social landlords, suggesting to them that they consider installing sprinklers. And the government did that at the time, and some councils and RSLs responded. I think one thing that this public inquiry should definitely look at, and again that should happen sooner rather than later, is whether we should make it mandatory, so a legal requirement for all of those 4,000 buildings to have sprinkler systems retrofitted. So if they didn't have a sprinkler system when they were built, should one be installed now? And that is a very pressing question that I think the public inquiry needs to address.
quite possibly there are people in your constituency who will have to go to sleep in high-rise blocks tonight without sprinkler systems. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say that the local council in Croydon is checking buildings as we speak to assess any risk. Clearly, I mean, what happened in Grenfell Tower 2 days ago shouldn't have happened, even if the sprinklers, even if there were sprinklers. Something extraordinarily bad happened there that is outside of any sort of experience we've had of tower blocks in this country in history. So we need to find out what it was that went wrong, and we need to make sure there are no other blocks in the country which have this, whatever the defect was. And as I say, I'd say to residents in Croydon that the council is checking your blocks as we speak, and I know councils across the country are doing the same as a matter of urgency.
OK, Chris Philp, MP for Croydon, thank you very much for speaking to us.